Welcome to Timepiece. Right now we are using the telemeter scale on this Dan Henry 1939 to see how far away the camera was from that nuclear explosion. When we hear the blast, we'll stop the chronograph. Eleven and a half kilometers. So here we have a Dan Henry 1939, a vintage-inspired military chronograph. It's called the 1939 because it takes design inspiration from chronographs of that time period. It's a tool watch, albeit an old-school one. So let's take a look at this dial. Starting on the very outside, we have the telemeter scale. We've got a sub-seconds track just inside of that. And in the middle, we have the focal point of this watch, a spiral tachymeter that lays over two subdials for elapsed minutes and running seconds. This design is very reminiscent of some of the great watches of all time, with design inspiration taken heavily from vintage chronographs from the likes of Longines, Rolex, Heuer, Tissot. You get the idea. This dial has a very fine texture to it. In normal light, it's a very light silver, but in bright light, it looks white. And in soft light, it definitely looks like a champagne color. The print quality on this dial is excellent. It is very crisp. It's maybe not the most legible dial with the overlapping tachymeter scale, but it's pretty manageable with the high contrast of the indices and hands against the dial. In terms of markers, we've got numerals with bullet markers. Those bullet markers definitely draw inspiration from pre-Daytona Rolex chronographs. So the dial is printed, definitely with multiple coats, or at least a thicker application of paint on the numerals and those bullet indices. You can see just under the 12, the branding, Dan Henry. It's a little generic sounding. Besides that, though, no unnecessary text. I think the choice of hands for this watch is absolutely perfect. We've got sword hands for the hour and minute hands. Each have a slight taper that I think fits the overall look really well, as does the spade counterbalance on the chronograph seconds hand. On the subdials, you see a counterbalanced running seconds hand and a leaf style hand for elapsed minutes. These are blued hands. When you're talking about bluing metal, the cheapest and the least impressive is just painting them. And on the other end of it, you've got the most expensive and the most lustrous, which is thermally blued hands. This is kind of in the middle. These are enameled blued hands. I think it's a solid middle ground. You get a solid luster. You get it to change in the light, but it's really not overbearing. Most of the time, these hands do look black, but with the flick of a wrist, you get a really electric, vibrant blue color. Let me see if I can reflect some of that. You see that right there? Excellent. It is a 1 Hertz quartz tick, and that's fine. There is absolutely nothing wrong with a 1 Hertz quartz tick. There are some downsides, like the movement is essentially over before it even starts, and time itself isn't discrete, so a 1 Hertz tick isn't necessarily the best visual representation of time. But from a functionality standpoint, it's excellent. Having said that, the running seconds hand is very understated as it's on a subdial. The chronograph seconds hand moves a vintagey 4 times a second. I think that's right in line with the design of this watch. It is a 60-minute chronograph. I like that on a battery-powered watch as opposed to a 12-hour chronograph. When you inevitably forget to stop the damn thing, it doesn't kill your battery. So in the middle, we've got a spiral tachymeter, and it's the main reason I bought this watch. I'm not aware of any new watch that has one. For me, spiral tachymeters really exemplify the vintage chronograph aesthetic. If you don't know about the tachymeter scale, you basically time how long it takes you to do one thing, and it tells you how many things you can do in an hour. It's helpful for things like determining speed and production rates. Most tachymeter scales offer just 60 seconds worth of conversions. The spiral extends that scale to 3 minutes. As far as tachymeters go, it's a pretty practical design. One problem I had with this watch was between 52 and 44 on the spiral. There are no markers, no marked indices. It's not a big deal, but if you're using the tachymeter to measure average speed, that range starts to get important. I'm not sure why they didn't. Maybe they just didn't see it, but who knows? The other scale of this watch is the telemeter scale. We used that in the beginning of the video. Because we know sound travels 1 kilometer every 3 seconds, you can use it to find out how far away things happened. When you consider each graduation on the telemeter scale represents a distance of only 100 meters, you can hone in pretty accurately. Let's talk dimensions. It's been said before, and it'll be said again. What is all but confirmed to be the most precise combination of things ever assembled. A royal Swiss-made caliper endorsed by a pair of old-school German woodworking machinists. People, it doesn't get any better than this. We have a diameter of 41 millimeters. We've got a lug-to-lug measurement of about 48 and a half. 22 millimeter lugs. At its widest point, it is 13 and a half millimeters thick. I'd say it definitely wears a little larger than I was expecting. It wears every bit of those 41 millimeters, and that's kind of for two reasons. Number one, it doesn't have a bezel, and it's because of the light colored dial. The case it uses was specifically designed for this watch, but I think it would have looked even better with something slightly smaller. Something more like the watches it was inspired by. With the rise of the 40 millimeter dress watch that we're seeing today, this fits well within modern watch sizes, but if you're going to make a limited run, vintage inspired piece for enthusiasts by an enthusiast, why not go all the way and give it a slightly more vintage inspired size? 38 or 39 millimeters would be much bigger than its vintage counterparts still, and I think it would take this watch to the next level. Who knows? While I don't think the dimensions are perfect, I think the proportions are close. The case proportions definitely draw inspiration from the 40s Pateks, considered by many to be the best proportioned watches ever made. Not a bad starting point in terms of inspiration. The case is 316L stainless steel, alternating between high polish and brushed finishes. Now let's flip it over and take a look at the case back. Check out that case back. It's a great feature of this watch. Full of conversion scales, totally unnecessary, 100% welcomed and appreciated. You have Celsius to Fahrenheit, liters per 100 kilometer to miles per gallon, PSI to bar for pressure, kilopounds per square inch to megapascals. That'd be for hydraulic systems. And lastly, miles per hour to kilometers per hour. I would have liked to see the etching on this case back a little bit deeper, but I don't think I can complain about it at this price point. Water resistance, you're looking at 50 meters. That's fine. Don't go swimming with it. Don't use the pushers underwater, but that should go without saying. Speaking of pushers, we have some pretty good ones. Really excellent pusher action. If I had to describe this to someone who didn't own this watch, go find a TV remote from 1999. You know, the one with the big rubber buttons. Stick it in the freezer for 24 hours, pull it out right away and press the power button. You know what I'm saying? It's chunky and it's solid with just the slightest amount of give. Very nice. And to top things off, we have an onion crown signed with the Dan Henry DH logo in between those pushers. Not a screw-down crown. We've got a sapphire-coated mineral glass, highly domed, very appropriate for a watch of this aesthetic. I think they made a great choice on the crystal design. Anti-reflective coating on the inside. Smudges aren't a problem at all either. So we've got teardrop-shaped lugs, the side profile of which is probably the only stylistic choice I don't love. What do these remind me of? I can't put my finger on it. So the movement is a Japanese quartz Miyota 6S21. You're looking at 3 years battery life, hacking seconds with an accuracy of plus or minus 20 seconds a month. As far as off-the-shelf chronograph movements go, this is a good one. You can see the second hand bisects each index perfectly every time without fail. There is no wobble to the second hand after the tick, indicating tight tolerances and impressive build quality. As far as I'm concerned, this movement has passed all the tests. It's made in China, but absolutely no complaints about the build quality. There's no loom on this, definitely the right choice for a watch with such a vintage aesthetic. Okay, so for around $200, you sort of expect low-quality extras, but these were pretty impressive. You expect the straps to be bad, but they aren't. So the leather strap is pretty good quality. It's thick, it's soft, it's supple, it wears nicely on the wrist. It also came with a one-piece NATO style strap. I say NATO style. Take a look at that. It's got built-in spring bars. It makes changing straps very easy. I'm a big fan of those. I want to see more of those. What a great feature. Having said that, I'm not sure they needed to reinvent the wheel with this NATO strap. With this design, you can't adjust how far away these spring bars are. When I first got it, the NATO strap was so tight I almost couldn't fit it. I was worried I would snap a spring bar. It's stretched out a little bit with wear, but it's still tight, and the design makes the strap come up from the lugs instead of lying flat when you wear it on the wrist. Let me show you what I mean by that. So the straps in the watch come in a 3-pocket watch roll made of canvas, leather, and wax cotton. Again, with the $220 watch, I was expecting it to be pretty lousy, but it's actually pretty nice. I mean, the watch roll fits into this hard plastic case, which is going to protect it from crushing. It's not Fort Knox, but it's good enough. Even if you own several watches, the travel pouch is a handy addition. You know, I didn't have a watch roll, and now if I want to take several watches on a trip or whatever, I can use it. The leather NATO you see here didn't come with the watch, but I think it looks too good on it not to use for the video. There are 2 colorations available for this 1939 model, but they're almost 2 separate watches entirely. The other 1939 with a black dial offers a different dial scale, incorporating a pulsometer instead of a spiral tachymeter. The other main difference being that it incorporates syringe-style hands instead of these elongated, tapered sword hands. My preference should be obvious given the one I bought, but I like both of them. So the Dan Henry 1939 costs $220 shipped. Think for a second about what $220 gets you in the world of vintage mechanical chronographs. All right, just about kicked in the balls. Anything halfway decent is definitely over $1,000, and with a vintage chronograph, you're looking at services every 2 years too. That'll add up in a hurry. I think this is a very well thought out price point. Much higher and you start having to deal with some pretty serious competition, and it would lose the cheap and cheerful factor, which this has in spades. I agree with the decision not to throw in a mechanical movement. It's much slimmer with a quartz movement, and a mechanical movement means tripling the price, which means even more serious competition. Not to mention that it would be a much less reliable piece. With a budget mechanical chronograph, I'll say those last 3 words again. Budget mechanical chronograph, not bywords for reliability. You don't want that, and with this watch you don't get that. I think at $220 shipped, it's priced well, and it might even represent good value for money. So this is a limited edition, maybe. Dan Henry claims it's a limited run of 1,939 pieces, but every time I've seen the watch sell out, they always advertise as having more coming. Maybe 1939 is just how many are in each run. I don't know, but my guess would be they have orders of 2,000 pieces per run, and they save a few for warranty replacements. From what I've seen, it appears that when they sell out, another batch gets made. If that's how it is, then it's really corny to call that a limited edition. It's all pretty much speculation on my part, so if anybody actually knows what's up, let me know in the comments. Either way, it's a safe bet you won't run into another person wearing one of these. Dan Henry is a fairly new micro brand. That said, they've gone about creating a micro brand the right way. A lot of micro brands look to Kickstarter for funding, which is an awful business model for the consumer, really. Avoid buying watches from Kickstarter. But Dan Henry was entirely funded up front, allegedly with funds from selling part of his huge vintage watch collection. If that's true, that's pretty cool. You get a 1-year warranty on this, pretty good for a small micro brand. And then every watch is an exercise in compromise. This is far from perfect. I think the watch itself is a little too large, and I'm not in love with the side profile of these lugs. At the end of the day, it is just a made-in-China watch with an off-the-shelf quartz, but it has a lot going for it. The proportions of the case back, the onion crown, the blued hands, the dial layout, particularly that spiral tachymeter, speaks so well to its vintage aesthetic. So that's going to do it for today. Thanks for watching. If you're still watching this, hit subscribe already, you freeloading hippie, and I'll see you next time. Thanks.